I always ask myself two things before I start writing one of these books. The first is, what time of year is it? Because seasons matter. People are different depending on the time of year. The winter in Rome is very cold, the summer is very hot. People change in that kind of situation. The other question I ask myself is, whereabouts in Rome am I going to focus that particular story? Because I don't write big panoramic stories that cover a huge landscape. You know, I think writers are either telescope people or microscope people. Telescope writers scan a big broad horizon looking for something original. Microscope writers like me look at a small place very, very closely and try to see something in very fine detail.
This story begins just before Christmas. Here's the Piazza Navona at that time of year. It's a big party time. There's also a lot of weather around as well, as you can see with this flooded picture of the Tiber. It was very much a world out of kilter, and that was what I was trying to reproduce in the book, really.
And for this story, I picked a particular place, a very small area of Rome that you could walk around in an hour or so.
It lies between the Pantheon and the Piazza Navona and the Piazza del Popolo, and a few centuries ago it was known as Ortaccio, which is the name I use in the book. And it was the place where the popes decided that the prostitutes ought to live, and by some strange coincidence very soon afterwards all of the poets and artists and writers moved in too. What happens in the story is that in an old studio in Ortaccio, a painting that appears to be a lost Caravaggio is found in very tragic and mysterious circumstances. This is a murder case, and Costa and co are assigned to deal with it, and very soon it's a case that becomes extremely personal indeed. I like to think of Rome as a character just as much as Leo Falcone, Nic Costa or Teresa Lupo herself. A very varied character, an unpredictable character, one that can run from these riches in the Palazzo Altemps, which is one of the grander public places in the Ortaccio, to some quiet, sometimes desolate, sometimes slightly squalid back streets, and curious sights too, like the Mausoleum of Augustus here, the place where the great emperor was buried, and it's now a bit of a wreck that nobody knows what to do with. There are many more reflective corners too, such as the Church of Sant'Agostino, which was the church that the prostitutes used and is still a remarkable place today. And then there are the talking statues that were used as sort of signposts in the street by the population to say things that they were never allowed to say in public and attach their name to. But more than anything in this area, there's this chap.
I established in the first book that Nic Costa is pretty obsessed with the artist Caravaggio for several reasons. One is that Caravaggio is very closely associated with Rome, and Costa sees himself as a very true Roman. But also the art of Caravaggio is very liberating, very revolutionary, very, very real, and actually quite brave in many, many ways. Caravaggio got into terrible trouble during his lifetime, and some of those things that happened to him actually come up as part of the story of this particular book. So the first thing I had to do was actually look at Caravaggio in Rome, and so I spent a very cold but very pleasant winter essentially going around from art gallery to art gallery and private palace to private palace, looking at Caravaggio's paintings in the city, thinking about them and trying to imagine them in their original state, because many of them are still on the very walls for which they were painted. Two in particular became very important to me, and they're in a private palace called the Palazzo Doria Pamphili, which from the outside doesn't look very much at all. It's just another grand building off the Via Corso. But inside is a wonderful private mansion, much as it was in many places 200-300 years ago, when it was, as it still is, in the ownership of a family that gave us at least one particular pope. Inside the Doria Pamphili there are just two Caravaggio canvases. One is called The Rest on the Flight from Egypt. The other is The Penitent Magdalene. They are astonishing paintings. I can't possibly show you them in a video like this. You can't see them properly on the internet. The only way you'll ever see them properly is to go there to Rome in real life and step inside the Doria Pamphili, which happily is open to the public and a delightful place to visit too. The Flight from Egypt is an extraordinary canvas, a very rich one with a lot of metaphysical and metaphorical detail. It shows Mary asleep with the baby Jesus in her arms, a very grizzled old grey Joseph holding the music for an angel who's playing the violin. Quite an extraordinary piece of work. Next to it is something much more modest, and it was my first key into this book. It's a picture of Mary Magdalene, the penitent Magdalene it's known as. It's a woman, she's fast asleep, she's a prostitute, as was Mary Magdalene. This is a real Roman prostitute wearing the costume of a Roman prostitute of the 17th century. And the closer you get to it, the more you realise that there's something very interesting and special going on, because until you finally get sort of 3 inches away, and when you really come up and look at the thing incredibly closely like that, you won't see it. But when you get that close, you realise that painted on the cheek of this sleeping Roman prostitute is a tiny pearl-like tear, and you probably only see it from about 3 or 4 inches away. Any further away than that, you either don't notice it at all, or you think there's actually some sort of blemish on the canvas. It's just a fantastic detail. But you know, when I first saw it, I thought it was a heart-stopping moment, because I felt I was in the presence of this long dead woman, but also the artist Caravaggio, who created this extraordinary scene. In many ways, this is a story about grief and love. There are some tragic incidents in it. There are relationships that are brought to the brink and an end. And it's about, in some ways, how people deal with those extremes that we all of us have to face sometime in life. I introduced a new character into this, a young nun called Agata Graziano, who is an art expert and knows a lot more about Caravaggio than Nic Costa ever will, but at the same time is kind of a foil to his particular intellectual outlook, in the sense that, you know, he's a very worldly man who's looking for something spiritual, and she actually is a very spiritual woman who's fascinated by the worldly side of things, a little frightened that she's going to be dragged into it more than she wants to be. That, of course, is exactly what happens, because this is a piece of fiction, this is a story, and that's what we do in these tales. Thanks for letting me ramble on about the Garden of Evil. It's a great pleasure to be able to earn a living this way, I have to say, and I'm very flattered by the interest that I get from lots of international readers for these books. The next one will be out very soon. It's called Dante's Numbers. As I say, it's always going to be different with me. This is one where finally they get on an aircraft and go somewhere that is on a different continent altogether. And that was an interesting book to write as well. I hope it'll be an interesting one for you to read. After that, they are, however, back in Rome for the 8th book, which I finished just a few days ago on this computer here behind me. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you about these things over this wonderful medium, and I hope we'll have more videos coming for you very soon. So if you want to sign up for the newsletter, I think there are lots of competitions and all manner of promotional things. They're all beyond me, you know. I just write books. That's the only thing I know how to do, and I hope we get to meet in the flesh sometime at some convention somewhere along the way. Anyway, thanks for stopping by. Goodbye.